Hi, Mary Louise. Hi, Mary Louise.
Can you hear me?
I can now, yes. Sorry, I think I was muted. How are you?
I'm just fine. Am I the first one here?
You're the first and only one.
Well, I better not be there for the whole 3 hours.
No.
Yeah, full screen. Where are you? I can't see you.
Oh, I had my camera off. I'm
Okay.
not usually on video for the event, so.
Okay. How's life over there in Toronto? Toronto, as my grandmother used to say.
Life is okay. It's a little bit of a quieter time with the summer, so trying to enjoy as much as we can now that things are starting to reopen. So
Well, we're in a COVID hotspot.
yeah.
We had another 52 cases today.
Oh wow. It's never ending, it seems like. I was hearing on the news, they said they might cancel the Tokyo Olympics because the cases have been out of control there, like over.
Well, they aren't vaccinated, the folks there. They didn't have a supply of vaccine. This is what I heard.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe because I'm not an Olympian myself, but seems like not the smartest thing to be doing. With all these young folks going into the Olympics and the mix and mingling that I hear goes on there.
Everybody. Okay. I wanted to welcome everybody here. I know that we usually do a land acknowledgement, and I need to have that in front of me in terms of where I am from, if someone else can do a proper land acknowledgement, but we do want to acknowledge that we're on territories where most of us would be considered settlers, and something that we didn't acknowledge in most public settings even 5 years ago. Welcome to this Pegasus Institute meeting. Pegasus began as a conference back in 2014, and we were going to have another conference in 2020. It was happening every 2 years, but the pandemic had other ideas for us. And at that time, we were actually going to have a meeting of this group, which many of us have been part of now for a decade. And we congregated, I think, first around 2010, as we were thinking of furthering work of the Canadian Environmental Law Association, that they had done some work looking at communities with concerns, largely racialized communities, but concerned about environmental toxins, exposures that they had in their health. And we were initially trying to see whether we could get a field epidemiologist from the Public Health Agency, and applied for funding, and then met every couple of years to figure out how we were going to do some stuff collaboratively without funding. We've been a group of largely Ontario University people. And then very recently, we had interest expressed with a seminar that we had with Ingrid Waldron, who's been working on these issues very specifically in Nova Scotia, and now developed more of a national network. And Stephanie and Munvi are part of a student group that they'll describe, inspired by Ingrid. So we thought that when we couldn't meet as a group during Pegasus, that maybe we should try to do this now in a different way. And so the invitees that we have include the original group of experts and a few people who are friends of theirs, and then other people from our Pegasus Institute with such expertise. So just wanted to welcome everybody. And we had a brief agenda, and so I had developed something general, and Stephanie really reordered and put it in a different form and brought a lot of articles that have been of interest, especially to her group. But essentially, we wanted to do introductions of people, find out what people have been working on, and to see whether there were ways in which we could further action as a group, and perhaps with this new nonprofit, perhaps soon to be charitable institution, Pegasus. Does that sound okay to people? Okay. So on the invitation that you got, there is a link to that document that I see many of you on with this semi-formal agenda, and then also to the bios of people. So you can read some of these things. Some of them I think Melissa got off the web, and I realized that not all of the bios are up to date. As people are talking, you might want to look at their bios, but maybe I'll just call on people to introduce themselves and their interest in the theme. And I don't know whether maybe I'll just go by the names that I see on here, are the pictures as I'm looking at you. So briefly introduce yourselves. So we have a couple of people who aren't panelists who are here, who could also briefly introduce themselves, but it's primarily, I think, meant for the panelists here. And if some people want to be anonymous who aren't part of us, but because this is being recorded, they're welcome to change their name to Mickey Mouse and put themselves on without video. Without further ado then, so I'm Neil Aria, the chair of Pegasus, and have been involved here for a number of years. I'm an adjunct in environmental studies at the University of Waterloo and part of a couple of faculties of medicine, also as an adjunct. So I've had an interest in the intersection between environment and health, as well as underserved populations. I run a refugee health clinic, worked in St. John's Kitchen, which worked with people who were precariously housed, and being involved with guidelines related to that. So I've had a general interest in all of these issues, and connected, I think, with Sela and Teresa when I was the chair of the Environmental Health Committee of the Ontario College of Family Physicians. So Mary Louise, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm ostensibly retired. I'm formally retired from the University of Waterloo as a prof there in the Faculty of Environment. My interests are primarily in the areas of sustainable and healthy communities in local governance. And for the purposes of this seminar, I'm interested in questions of, and I'll be talking about the questions of spatial justice and the right to the city, and I'll explain about that a little later.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Definitely a pleasure to be here. I'm here representing an organization founded by a good friend and fellow volunteer, Manvi Bala. And Shake Up the Establishment was founded a couple years ago, and we're a climate justice youth organization. And so essentially collaborating with a bunch of organizations that are climate justice focused across Canada. So we do a lot of resource creation and outreach to other organizations, and essentially trying to intersect the issues of climate crisis and social justice together. And yeah, I recently graduated from the University of Guelph with a BSc in molecular biology, and I'll be doing a master's of bioinformatics there next year.
Thank you. Dorothy.
Hi, everyone. I'm just here to listen. I sit on the board for Pegasus, as well as I teach at Nipissing University in the School of Social Work, teaching their Indigenous courses. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Elliott. I'm a faculty member at the University of Waterloo in geography. I know lots of people on the call and some are new to me, so great to meet you. I work in the area of global health. I also do stuff in Canada too, but I primarily work in sub-Saharan Africa, a little bit in Latin America on water sanitation and hygiene issues, a little bit of climate change, and of course, a lot of the SDGs like most of us. I, like Shauna, who you'll hear from in a minute, are very much involved in the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research and the Canadian Society for International Health, which are in the process of amalgamating into a new organization in Canada called the Canadian Association for Global Health, which, fingers crossed, we were going to start on July 1st, but we're still waiting for the paperwork to come. It's lost in the COVID mail somewhere. But we're very, very excited about that, to have an umbrella organization in Canada that addresses global health research as well as global health advocacy and policy.
Thanks, Susan. And Isaac.
Hi, my name is Isaac Lugna. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography and Environment at Western. My background training was in environmental exposure, environmental health. But as I, get involved in stuff, I found myself doing a lot more of food security and climate change work, mostly focused in sub-Saharan Africa.
Thanks. Keithan.
Hey everyone, nice to be here. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Keithan Shankadas. I'm an associate professor at Wilfrid Laurier University in the Department of Health Sciences. My training's in epidemiology, and I think in practice I'm more of a social epidemiologist. Most of my research concerns systems level interventions for health equity. But my training during my doctorate studies, I focused a lot on air pollution and stress and how they interact to kind of create kind of double jeopardy for people living in more impoverished areas and in places with more stress, really, and more environmental exposures. Currently, I think the project that really overlaps well with this group is that I'm leading a research study based in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories in partnership with the Yellowknife Dene First Nation. And we're studying how the Giant Mine, which is an abandoned gold mine, which has left a really large legacy of contamination up there. We're really interested in the long-term impact across the life course of that, the mine and the contamination on chronic stress for people who live in the Yellowknife, Delo, and Deta area. So nice to be here.
Thank you. Teresa.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see many of you again. I know many of you in a variety of ways, and nice to meet many of you for the first time. Looking forward to hearing about the work you're all doing. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Environmental Law Association, and joining me today is Jacqueline Wilson, who will introduce herself shortly, and Faye de Leon is going to join us after she finishes up another appointment. And in terms of this group, I'm looking forward to having a chance for us to exchange information on some of the things that are going on. But in particular, we have a focus going on right now in a lot of our student programs on climate change and vulnerable communities in regions around Ontario. And we're assembling database and toolkit info and best practices and some interjurisdictional research around what health units are doing under the Ontario Health Protection Promotion Act and their standards, and what municipalities who adopted climate change declarations are doing when they're implementing those declarations in their municipalities. And in both cases, we're specifically asking them or digging into whether they're taking into account equity in their climate change implementation and thinking locally. So our interest, and we have, Faye will talk more about SEPA when she joins, and some of our on Bill C-230, and Kathy Cooper, who's next door to me here in the office but isn't on the call today, has done a lot of work with Canadian Partnership for Children's Health and the Environment, particularly around rent safe. And so we have some interesting work happening there that we can talk about if you like, around indoor air quality. And then a coalition of clinics are about to launch a campaign looking for provincial reporting in Ontario on heat deaths, which does not happen in Ontario so far. So CELA's interest will be in linking with communities who want legal advice in pushing solutions like bylaws or actual on the ground action, and supporting those communities or student programs to push for those solutions. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, thanks. And later on, after we do introductions, Teresa, I'd like you just to talk about both making the links and rent safe, just so people get a sense of the history of our group a little bit more, and talking about the communities in which you've worked and how we relate to communities, which is going to be important to us. Then Hannah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to join this group for the first time, and nice to see some familiar faces and meet some new people as well. So I'm also at the University of Waterloo, fairly new to the University of Waterloo. I moved there from the University of Guelph in 2019. So I have a background in nutrition. I was formerly an assistant professor in applied human nutrition at the University of Guelph. And now I'm in the School of Public Health and Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo, and was just able to get a Canada Research Chair focused on Indigenous health, wellness, and food environment. So that's most of the research that I'm involved in, is looking at specific food environments, not necessarily just the physical environments, but also focusing on social environments as well as physiological environments. So I do a lot of work with Indigenous women and pregnancy, prenatal care. I have a recently funded SHIRK grant that's looking at first foods, so breastfeeding and complementary foods. So looking at social environments, and specifically in terms of urban settings, and providing social supports for Indigenous women. Yeah, and I also have, I should mention too, in terms of environments, I have training in nutrition and public health, but I also did my postdoc there in geography at Western, where Isaac's based. So nice to see you again, Isaac. Thanks for letting me join the group today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you. And Barbara. I know Barbara's not on the panel, but we're a small enough group. So did you want to say a couple of words, Barbara? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you for asking me to do so. It's a pleasure to meet all these knowledgeable and talented people. I'm a retired dermatologist. My main, other than dermatology, interest in the last number of years has been peace and disarmament issues, particularly for nuclear weapons. I'd like to get rid of the worst possible environmental effect of all, and general nuclear war, and also aware of other effects of war on the environment. So my major group has been IPPNW Canada, and I also belong to a number of other groups, particularly at the moment busy with Hiroshima Nagasaki Day Coalition, preparing for August 6th. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. And Barbara was on our CPREP executive, the group that started the Pegasus conference. Sanjay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me for the first meeting. My background is in social work and economic development, and for the longest time, I worked for the region of Waterloo, doing some poverty work, equity, Indigenous reconciliation work, and mostly in community engagement and policy development. I'm now moving to the city of Waterloo as their new Director of Indigenous Initiatives, Anti-Racism, Equity, and Accessibility, starting, I think, August 16th. So this is really cool because I was part of the region's climate action plan and trying to look at equity issues there. And it is pretty low when you look at how much can be done. So I'm really excited to see as a city, when I start my new role, how do we really integrate some of your thinking into equity and anti-racism work? So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sanjay. Shauna.
Thanks, Neil, and really nice to meet everyone. My name's Shauna O'Hearn, and I'm the East Coast representative. I'm based in at Dalhousie University as the Director of Community Partnerships and Global Health in our Faculty of Medicine, and have been connected with Pegasus over the years through the conference planning and on the advisory board at the moment. And as well, I do have a University of Waterloo connection as a PhD candidate in health geography. And I'm looking forward to the conversations today. I will need to step out for a short time, but I will come back afterwards, Neil.
Okay, thanks, Shauna. Bruce.
Hi, thanks, Neil, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to see those that I know here, and good to meet everybody else. So I'm Bruce Newbold. I'm a professor of geography at McMaster University in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society, and I'm also the director of that school. Much of my research over the past few years has been looking at refugee and immigrant health issues, settlement, access to healthcare, their changing health over time. And included in that, one of my recent master's students, Teresa made me think of it, just looked at heat effects and messaging to older immigrant adults in the city of Hamilton under extreme heat events and whether or not they actually get the message or not. A lot of work too has started to transition to more aging related issues, mobility, health related issues within Canada's aging population. So good to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Jacqueline, once again.
Hi, thanks so much, Neil. So my name is Jacqueline Wilson, and I'm a lawyer at the Canadian Environmental Law Association with Teresa and Faye de Leon, who's going to either has joined or is going to join soon. And my interest in this group is on sort of the environmental justice and climate justice and health connection. I'm working with Teresa on the project she mentioned about climate change and municipal action to look at climate change from an equity perspective and tools that can be used to address those issues at the municipal level. I also work with the Low Income Energy Network, which is founded by Cecilia and one of our sister legal aid clinics, the Housing Rights Clinic. And we look at sort of energy poverty and climate justice issues as well. Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Thank you. And Dawn.
Yeah, hi, my name's Don Sutherland. I'm out on the West Coast on Gabriola Island, so I have occasional problems with the reception and so on, so I will stay on not with my video going. Originally I was trained as a family doctor, but I went on to do a lot of other things, including refugee work in international places like Somalia and Sudan and many other countries in Africa and Latin America and to some extent in Asia. My postgraduate studies were in community health in Liverpool and in epidemiology at the London School. And I was then working laterally in the federal government in the public health agency. So I've had a whole range of perspectives. I'm on the Pegasus Advisory Board, and I'm also an assistant for CSIH in various roles. So today, in front of this wonderful array of intellectual, let's say, persons in Canada, I'm hoping to learn, and so I can contribute further with Pegasus and other situations. So thank you very much for letting me listen in, and I'll disappear again.
Okay. Thanks, Don. Camille.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Camille and I'm the event manager with Pegasus. I've been with the Pegasus previous to the Institute, the conference, since 2018. So working on the programming, supporting our volunteer and board and committee members. I have a personal passion for sustainability. I teach a course in that at Centennial College as well as Durham College in Oshawa. And I'm just here as a participant today, listening in to this amazing discussion.
And Robert.
Hello, everybody. I'm just a student at Wilfrid Laurier University. And just like Camille, I volunteer with the Pegasus Institute and with Dr. Arya. And I'm just a participant, and I look forward to the conversations here today.
Okay, well, thank you all. So you could probably get a sense for those who are new to things, why we have invited people who probably, I wouldn't say that using the cliche of the elephant, we probably know different parts of the elephant. I think that many of you have not really even stated your specific expertise in this regard, and particular studies that you've led or been part of, and I'm sure that will come as we move further in discussion. But maybe Teresa, you might start with things, because at least for me, it was your work that started off this, even though I know Susan and Isaac and others have been, and Caitlin have been working as academics in this, but I think that we as a group got started because of community concerns, which Sheila and you had identified. So maybe you could take us through the history a little bit.
Sure, yeah, and it's really great to get many on this group together every once in a while, and then now to be reconvening to maybe think, as I think somebody added the agenda, about what we can, do as a kind of specific, concrete collaboration going forward. But this work that Neil is speaking about was an earlier collaborative effort that CELA undertook a number of years ago called Making the Links. And we had funding from the Law Foundation of Ontario and a full-time lawyer for a few years to reach out to 6 communities in Ontario where there were high levels of low income and poverty and high levels of current pollution and or legacy pollution. And over the course of that project, we worked with other service providers in those communities, with community members, with academic members, which is how some of these connections were made, and worked to identify what were the top issues that people were experiencing from an environmental justice perspective on the ground, so to speak, that they would benefit from additional information, tools, capacity, advice, and support to take action and move forward. And it was interesting. So the 6 communities, just so you know, and CELA is primarily funded as an Ontario legal aid clinic, even though we're also a national NGO, and we also have quite a significant international amount of work that we do. But because of the legal aid mandate, we chose 6 Ontario communities. So they were Kenora, Sarnia, Windsor, Hamilton, Cornwall, and Brantford. It was quite interesting to see what the commonalities were across those communities at the time about the kinds of things they were interested in. So, for example, some of you talked about your work on nutrition and on food. This was a really common issue that people raised themselves, was the idea of access to safe food, food that wasn't subject to more pesticides than they wanted, food that was actually accessible in their community or where they lived in their neighborhood from a sort of food desert perspective, fresh food, that kind of thing. So that led into a lot of work we subsequently did supporting Ontario's Local Food Act. So our work is always about intersections and then going off and pushing for some particular law reform or a case to move the legal agenda forward. So that was a straight line to that. We also found that there was a huge amount of concern and interest in legacy pollutants. And so we did far more on brownfields, which are contaminated industrial sites that still remain in the communities, in that project than we had expected to do. Ongoing pollution, particularly air pollution, but also significant concerns around water pollution and safe water, was another really huge theme that crossed all of those communities. And we supported people with understanding how they could get data about the pollution in their community. We pointed to the right to know bylaw that Toronto was in the middle of adopting at that time and then subsequently did adopt. And made a lot of connections around that. And in general, most of these communities were also in the Great Lakes Basin, so we made connections to our work on toxics in the Great Lakes and air pollution in the Great Lakes. So from that work, a number of different things continued over time, including doing a reprise of that work in a number of other communities in Ontario in French, and doing a public legal education tour, and then identifying communities that were underserved. And now, as mentioned, fast forward a few years, we're looking at the issue of climate change and vulnerable communities in particular, and thinking about how we can bring some of the same tools and skill sets to support communities around alleviating the worst impacts of climate change on the most vulnerable communities in really concrete ways. And so at CELA, we're always interested in taking the great knowledge that all of you are working on and assembling and studying and writing peer-reviewed literature about, and then bringing it to the ground about how it can support and persuade and see action taken forward. And of course, we always have lots of law reform going on in the background about all of these things. So for example, Bill C-12 just passed federally, which is the bill about how the government will actually implement and be more accountable about their climate change targets federally. We had a lot of setbacks in Ontario on the renewables side of the world, and so that's just work that will kind of have to be done over again at some point when the political climate allows for that. And then some amount of receptivity over water protection in Ontario, but that's pretty stalled. So for many of the communities we work with, that remains a pretty major issue. You mentioned earlier as well, rent safe, Neil, and so many years ago, a couple decades ago, we did a big study, which at the time was pretty groundbreaking, as I recall, on standard setting and children's health, children's environmental health. And our research question involved a large number of partners. And the research question was, is standard setting in Canada intentionally protective of children's health? And the answer in general was no. And we had looked at pesticides as a category. We looked at consumer products. We looked at benzene and air standards and so forth. So that led to the formation of the Canadian Partnership for Children's Health and the Environment. Lots of work on lots of different things like pesticides and improving the rules. But one of the multi-year, multi-partner efforts that's been going on since then is Rent Safe, where we're bringing a lot of this information around low-income communities, tenants, and indoor health, like are they consenting to being exposed to pesticides if they're spraying, in a building, for example. Work on being able to help communities with mold and requiring landlords to do something about the conditions that are allowing for mold in that housing stock at the Landlord Tenant Board. And we have a big project about getting a standard expert kind of affidavit that we hope will be accepted, that's had some funding lately. Quite a few interesting pieces going on under Rent Safe. So I'll stop there, but it's just to say that our focus is very much on low-income and vulnerable communities, and very much on how legal tools and legal processes can assist them to avoid the impacts of environmental decision making or adverse environmental conditions, and how it can help them participate in those processes and be part of the solutions.
No, that's great. I wonder whether anybody else just wants to talk a little bit about their work before I move to the next part of our informal agenda. Susan, Bruce, Cathan, Isaac, Hannah, anybody want to talk about work that you've done in the domain of environmental toxins and underserved or vulnerable communities? I'm going to move, once we talk about that, I'll actually move into the more specific environmental racism aspect, because as a group, we weren't really, although the communities that Teresa had chosen, a couple of them were deliberately chosen for being Indigenous communities, I believe, but even then we weren't calling this project really environmental racism. It was just populations that were underserved, communities of concern. So as you think about whether you want to talk about that, I think we'll do it by raising hands. So if you would like to do that, but Mary Louise, I see first, and then Susan.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend my particular comments later on under concrete actions and so on. I'll be talking about that, but I did want to just to the other people in the room that have more expertise than I in the area of environmental toxins. In the literature that I've read, the more popular literature, it seems to me there's an awful lot of focus on things like soil and water toxins and contaminations. When you think in terms of marginalized populations, vulnerable populations that often are living in contaminated areas, they're often in industrial areas, and it would be nice to see more studies or know of more studies that look at the health impacts of living right by a highway, when the sound effects of where you're living causes huge health impacts in terms, audio, the noise levels are much higher than one would think to be safe. And also visual impacts when kids, with increasing privatization of public spaces, kids are walking through neighborhoods that aren't through parks and nicer areas. These areas are degraded. So the physical, the visual environment, the audio environment, those kinds of issues are not ones you normally see when you're looking at the question of the biophysical environment and degradation in marginalized areas. And I'm just wondering if people, if anybody, there's also light pollution is another piece to it. Light from industrial areas into homes and places like that. So I'm just wondering if there is research that people in the biophysical side of things have been doing that I'm just not aware of.
Yeah, I think that Bruce and Cathan might have something to say about part of what you've said in terms of their work or work at their institutions. But Susan.
So actually, I'm an interloper. I don't want to share about my research, but I was wondering if on the agenda there was any time where we might hear more about the Pegasus Institute, because its development is new to me, and I'd like to hear more about how it fits into the global health and environmental health landscape in Canada. So I just wondered if that was on the agenda anywhere.
Yeah, maybe I'll say something more a bit later, because I think that in terms of our role with this within this domain, I think we were going to try to see as a group where this conversation led. But very briefly, Pegasus is really looking at global health, international and within the Canadian context, at its nexus with peace and sustainability. And so we're trying to be somewhat focused on those types of things, the intersection of things, having different educational type of events, but then maybe supporting other venues in which people can work together, whether it be to facilitate research or to promote various types of outreach, even academic books perhaps. So we're defining ourselves right now, and we've just come out of the conferences that we had every 2 years. So anybody else want to talk about their work here in the past? Bruce.
Yeah, Neil, I'll just jump in quickly. I guess just in part response to Mary Louise's questions or comments, we haven't done anything around light or noise pollution recently, but a few years back, we wrote several review articles on chemicals of concern. I used to direct the Institute for Environment and Health here at McMaster. That institute has evolved and changed over the years and now has a health equity direction. But certainly while I directed it, our mandate was really looking at environmental health issues. And so, as I say, we wrote several papers on chemicals of concern, and particularly in the Great Lakes area and what that would mean for population health related work in the area.
Thank you. Anyone else on this? So I'm going to move to the next part of the next question that we had. And I know when we were going to meet last year, we were already starting to think about action and how we would involve others, whether it be applying for a larger research grant here or whatever. And we were looking at people from Queen's and a few other institutions around the province and around the country. But our next questions, I think, relate specifically to environmental racism. And I do think that the discourse has really changed, that it was almost, I felt that when Teresa was making the links, it was almost like we were apologetic in some ways for choosing communities that way. And now all of a sudden, I think the discourse is much more accepting of naming what things really are. And I think some of you really have contributed to being allowed to have that conversation front and center in the community. And of course, Ingrid Waldron, who did a webinar for us, has also been very much in the forefront. Even Hannah was involved with Chantel Richmond and the film that was made then that she did, so similar to Ingrid's. So there's something in the water that we've seen this not just be of academic concern, but of general public concern. So I just wanted some comments about that. And I think Stephanie said, what have the successes been, the consequences, what progress has been there, talking a bit more about legislation, since we've got a couple of lawyers with us, and Teresa has talked about even Faye being on some discussions around legislation. So open this part of the discussion with that to anybody who wants to comment.
Would you like me to talk a little bit about the state of play of some of the current pieces of legislation? Sure. So Bill C-230, which is a bill to recognize and find out more about environmental racism, has received quite a bit of support. The question will be whether it'll get final passage, which I don't think it has, and how it would be implemented. But it's interesting that there has been quite a bit of all-party support for that bill, we do look, and Faye did do a blog discussing it. That's linked from our either this month's or last month's CELA e-bulletin. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. We have a monthly bulletin that we put out of kind of current things that are going on. It's very readable. It's very short. You know, some of the current things we're working on. But she noted, you know, some of the ways we would hope that it could be improved to be more specific about those impacts and alleviating those impacts. And similarly in Bill, oh gosh, Jacqueline, help me, I'm going to lose the name of the SEPA bill. I can't believe that. Anyway, momentary blank, but Canadian Environmental Protection Act is long overdue for reform. A bill was introduced by the current government to reform it. And it used some language around environmental rights in the preamble and a little bit elsewhere, but we're quite concerned that it doesn't actually operationalize those rights in any way. It doesn't provide any substantive rights to a healthy environment. It doesn't make it mandatory for the minister to take into account the impact on individual environmental and human rights in decision making. So we're definitely looking for quite a few things to improve in that bill, and then there are some things that would make things actually much worse. That bill has not gone past first reading, and of course, you know, we're all reading the newspapers and we're all expecting that maybe there'll be an election call late this summer. So anything that, you know, if the Parliament is prorogued, then it would die on the order paper and would have to be brought back later. But there are quite a few things we'd like to see improved in that bill, and that multiple standing committees of Parliament called for improvement around that legislation, and this bill just doesn't do it. And then there's Bill C12, which I mentioned earlier, which is the one that has some real potential, if implemented, to start making real some of the rhetoric around climate change. You know, CELA did participate in the litigation around the constitutional validity of the carbon pricing law, and that case was argued in front of the Supreme Court of Canada. We're, you know, quite happy that that's been strongly upheld. But the next step is, well, what else is happening apart from kind of broad society-based pricing? What is happening to make sure that all of these sectors actually do move, you know, to decarbonize, that there actually is accountability and tracking, that there actually is equity, you know, in terms of the benefits and the impacts of climate change. And so it was interesting because that bill for the first time started to go into a lot more detail, at least in the discussion paper and so on, about the potential. So I think it'll be incumbent upon, thanks Jacqueline, C28 is SEPA, to, you know, in civil society generally, and for all of us, everyone worried about climate change, to really be pushing this or any future government to account on that. And that bill did get passed. My understanding is, Jacqueline can verify this, but my understanding for sure it got through third reading, and I'm pretty sure somebody looked up for me the other day that it actually got through the Senate as well. So that means that regardless of who the future government might be, there's a bill on the books that we can hold them to account around. And for the purposes of this discussion, I think making sure we make that equity conversation central around climate change action is what we'd want to see. So those are a few things that are going on. And Jacqueline, did you want to elaborate on any of those?
No, I think those are the three biggest things happening. And yeah, Bill, oh, now I'm going to forget the numbers too, but the Climate Accountability Act has passed. So that has received royal assent and that is on the books. And then it looked to me like the environmental racism one, which is probably of most interest to this group, is at second reading now. So that hasn't gone to committee, I don't think, yet.
Okay. Thank you. I'm actually going to try to move us one step back, because as we're talking more about discourse and things like that, I might put it in a different way too, because I know that some of you have worked with communities. Cathan, you've talked to me about this, but I think that others have also talked about this, that there's, particularly amongst Indigenous communities, but I think with other racialized communities exposed to things, there's actually a mistrust of academics often, and academia and our approaches, and the feeling that the community isn't truly involved, that the communities are being studied, so they don't necessarily view us as being allies, at least not at the beginning. Cathan, did you want to start that off? And I think that I see some other people nodding a bit too, that maybe they might want to also express that. And I think that has relevance for our group, which has met a number of times in terms of how we directly involve others, even though we've worked with others.
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell, I guess, maybe a bit of the story of how I got involved in the study of the giant mine. And it's funny, I just submitted the research ethics application for that study, and it's been 6 years since I first got connected with that project. So it's been a very long journey. And I think, so this is a study of the giant mine. The giant mine was created, it was the first gold mine up in Yellowknife, and it was created on land that was traditionally foraging territory of the Yellowknives Dene, a particularly fertile area for them to gather food. It was area that was promised to be kept as a reserve by the government of Canada, and then within 10 years of that, they had approved a gold mine on the site. And that gold mine was the first gold mine up there. And so the practices of gold mining were very, not very well contained. They didn't really do toxic contamination practices in any sort of a modern way. And basically that pristine territory of the Yellowknives Dene is now essentially forever contaminated. They're going to remediate the site, but they're not going to be able to remove the contamination from that area. So, the government of Canada has taken responsibility for the site. They're remediating the site. And as a part of that process, they're having to conduct a series of health studies to see, what are the levels of arsenic in the environment? What are the levels of arsenic in people who live in the area? And then the study that I'm leading is how has this impacted people's chronic stress over time? The Yellowknives Dene, so they are very much a central part of this study because it's their territory that this mine was built on and has damaged. And I was brought in as somebody who has expertise in chronic stress and who might help lead this study. I was invited by a committee of people who work with this remediation project, which included the Yellowknives Dene and the North Slave Métis. And so I kind of went into it quite naively and thought it seemed like a great opportunity, and it was great that people were thinking about chronic stress and environmental contamination, which doesn't typically happen. And the planning for the project we went forward. We kind of made progress here and there. We would have meetings, but about a year and a half into it, I was basically told, people just don't have the time for this project right now. There wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. There was other studies happening kind of on top of studies, and they kind of just said, we just need to take a pause. Flash forward about another year, and the Yellowknives Dene kind of came back to the table and basically said, okay, we're ready to go with this now, but who's this guy? Meaning me. And why is he helping to lead this study? And it wasn't anything that had been raised before. But when you think of yourself as a researcher and you're typically applying for grants and it takes 3 or 4 attempts and then you finally get funded and you get to do a project, I really kind of slid into that research study relatively easily. And so, and then it became pretty clear pretty quickly that it wasn't so much that they didn't trust my expertise or that they didn't like me or that they didn't think that I could handle running this study. It was really the way that I was brought into the study. they as the people who have been most affected by this, and they as the people who are central to conducting this study, really should have been the ones to select who was going to be the scientist. They were very gracious, and we'd built up enough of a relationship, I think by that point, a working relationship, that they didn't say like, we want to start from scratch. But they brought on a technical consultant who was essentially their lead PI. And her and I have been working together since 2018 very well. We basically reduced the study design back to conceptual frameworks, redesigned the conceptual frameworks to better include their interests in the research, to focus more on resilience. And we've reconceptualized the study, redesigned it, and like I said, now 6 years later, we're finally ready to submit our research ethics application. So that's a long story, but just to say that it's not so much that we can't be the right people to do this work as non-Indigenous people, as settlers. It's about process, in my experience, and about making sure that when you have partners who are really deeply affected and who have a central role in the research, that they also have power in the process. And so we're designing the study with OCAP principles in mind, and we're sharing budgets, and we're doing a lot of things, I think, really well, and in ways that I would never have imagined back in 2015. So maybe I'll just leave it there, but I don't know if there's any questions or if anyone wants to build on that with their own experiences.
Can't hear you, Neil.
Go ahead, Barbara, and then Susan.
Just a quick question. The Dene have been previously afflicted by uranium mining, and they did develop cooperation with the government, with the CDUT group, and seem to improve some conditions that way. But looking at the government website, there's no report on that since 2015, and I don't know what's happening there. I did write a note to Carolyn Bennett asking about that, but didn't get a reply. Mind you, that was in COVID, so that's probably at the bottom of her list. But so I wonder if you have any comments on that.
I'm actually not aware of that work, so I can't really comment on any update on it. Yeah, I mean, the Yellowknives Dene are a pretty formidable presence in the north, and they do have a lot of irons in the fire. And so I'm kind of just coming in and on this one project, but I've not been involved in that other study.
Susan.
Thank you. So this is not about this particular project, but I just wanted to share with folks in the context of the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. The coalition worked very hard a few years ago to develop principles for doing research with others. It was in the context of global health research, but they apply to so many different contexts. The important thing about those principles, they've been published about in journals. We're producing a monograph, which will come out this fall, which is the application of the principles. So people who've used them in their work. One of the principles, for example, is humility. And I was the lucky one who got to write the chapter on humility and what has made me a humble researcher over the years. And I'm sure, Keaton, you could contribute to that as well. But the important thing about these principles I'll just share is that they've recently been adopted by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, and they have been incorporated into their strategic planning document. And so going forward, Steve Hoffman, who is the scientific director of the Institute for Population and Public Health, is very keen to mandate these going forward so that anyone who's doing research of this type will be held to that standard of these 6 principles about how do you develop meaningful partnerships, how do you articulate shared benefits, how do you express humility, where is your commitment to equity. And so I just wanted to share that with folks, and that it's in the strategic plan for CIHR, which is blasted all over their website. So if you're interested in them, you can have a look. They're not only very useful, but given CIHR is adopting them, at least recommending them, they're very useful for getting funding going forward.
I wonder, Hannah or Dorothy, whether you have any comments or response to this. Are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving far enough? How do you feel with the communities that you work?
Well, maybe I'll just respond briefly. I mean, I've worked in a number of different communities, in Indigenous communities in Manitoba and here in Ontario, mostly Southern communities, but both on reserve and off reserve. And I think, you know, it's great to have these guidelines and recommendations and the checks and balances that are in place in terms of our own institutions and research ethics boards. But I think that, you know, all communities are unique, and most of the work that I'm involved in is community-based participatory research. And I really feel that's the gold standard in terms of working with communities and responding to their needs and their interests. You know, as you were saying, Ketan, too, like and their priorities. You know, and I think especially right now with you know, the stresses and mourning and grieving that's taking place within Indigenous communities, I think that you know, we have to be very mindful of that and not be adding to their stress and adding to their you know, their list of things to do, and just being mindful of that in terms of, you know, the asks and you know, with ongoing research projects and things like that, to be able to, you know, take a pause and take a back seat and you know, as Ketan was saying too, sometimes that leads to delays. And as we've had, you know, in the last year with COVID, you know, not being able to spend time in community, I think is a huge drawback and limitation. I just got to restart with our own ethics board today to continue with the project virtually. And just, yeah, it's been over a year since we've been able to gather even outdoors to continue with projects. And so, but I think it's critical to be mindful of where communities and, you know, partners, organizations within communities, where they're at, and being able to adjust to those things. Because I've been in the position before where, you know, we've had to pull the plug on projects where we've received funding in the past, and we've had to decline funding because, you know, circumstances have changed, or there was one particular case where the funding was coming from an organization that had contributions from large multinational organizations, which they weren't comfortable with receiving. So I think that, you know, bearing all of those things in mind, it's tricky to do this research, but it's incredibly important.
I'm just going to get you to add, and then hopefully Dorothy's got some time in between granddaughter duty. But tell us a bit more how you feel that community-based participatory research differs. Where do you think that the researchers it doesn't have to be this group here, but where you feel that lessons might be learned by well-intentioned people who think, well, they've got an intermediary that they're dealing with, and then they're feeling that they're doing some good work of use to a community. So Hannah, that was just meant for you. If you,
sorry, are you asking?
Yeah, I just wondered if you,
me.
yeah, if you could, because I think it would be of interest to people. And I know, like, my wife has been part of work in Ecuador with the Anne Macaulay and people who work Ganawage have been part of that, and so I'm a little bit aware of some of the methods, and it's also been in books that I've edited. But if you could just really describe that for the group.
Well, I mean, it's been written about quite a bit. I often refer to, I just submitted my my tenure application at Waterloo just last month, and so in justifying timelines for research and publications and things like that, and doing community-based research, there's always that stipulation that things take longer, and I often refer to Heather Castleton's article. I spent the first year drinking tea, and I don't think that's far off the mark in terms of spending time with people, getting to know people. One of my other community partners in Kitchener, a Métis, amazing guy. He refers to himself as an urban indigenous farmer, Dave Skeen, who's the co-executive director of White Owl Native Ancestry Association. He always says that, even when people aren't getting along, he said, well, maybe they're just not spending enough time with each other. And I think that's definitely the case now within COVID, and we're meeting like this. It's hard to, maintain. Relationships are key. It's really all about relationships, relationality. I was just working on a book talking about, food and recipes, and working together around food as a reciprocal action that, it's so critical that, you're giving back, you're doing something that's of importance to the community, that you're contributing to their wellness, you're contributing to their growth. And I think that those are really key parts of doing community-based research. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been my experience.
Yeah. Dorothy, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think because my research was more personally focused, in the sense that it was my own community, my own First Nation that I was doing some work with. But I was very quick to realize that for how my community still does not have a strong appreciation for academics. They, whether or not they're Indigenous or not, they will pull away from them for whatever reasons, and we've already talked about or shared about already. And so when someone such as myself is trying to do research, it can be very difficult to find that balance, especially when it's your own community. And so it's trying, and on the other hand with that is, our elders have told us we need to go get the education so that we can learn how to deal with the people that are around us, that kind of thing. And so even though that's being encouraged, the pieces of it where we need to do research, and personally I'd like to be able to provide something to my own community, it tends to be that doing research other than in order to obtain that degree becomes more prominent. And so then it leaves it with researchers who may or may not have Indigenous background. It's all dependent upon that. But I really appreciated what Katin, sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name.
Katin, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. In talking about the process, ensuring the process is there, that was still very vital for our community. Well, at least in my experience with my own community, being able to choose who they want in that process, being able to be there at the very beginning and doing that piece of it is very important. It doesn't say that they will accept and go ahead with the research, but they need to be a part of that from the get-go in order for it to be able to move forward. And so it's still very much so. And part of that, I think everybody here can realize, even from all the discoveries or the uncovering of the information about what the school system has done to our people, it still is very ingrained in us to be very wary of the academic system. And so it's still something that still needs to be worked on from my perspective. Yeah, it's a miigwech.
Thank you. Cathan, you had your hand up, but now it's down. Did you want to say something?
I just kind of wanted to close the loop on something that Hannah brought up about having to reject funding sometimes because of the source of funding. And I think what Dorothy just said there about process. And I think what I didn't really put a fine point on with my story was that the reason that they were, so the funding for my project, for this project, comes from the Government of Canada, from Crown and Indigenous Relations. And so the Yellowknives were obviously going to be concerned about who is this person being selected by the funder, and are they going to, are we going to be traumatized in this process because, what is this research study really about? So I think it's almost like the parallel is the idea of conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest. Like, I think when we're doing work with partners, we need to be really careful about appearances. And I don't mean that to sound superficial, but and I think that's the reason that process is so important, because there has to be a way to properly understand partners, potential partners, and vet them and develop relationships. And that can't happen quickly or through, top-down processes.
I want to move to a couple of other issues if nobody else has anything about the topics we've talked about thus far. So you can put up your hand in the next few seconds if you'd like to continue some of this. I was just thinking about, the first thing would be CIHR, which you've said has now adopted these values, but CIHR, like other funders, has time limits with its fundings there, that whether you have 2 years or 3 years, are they accounting for that in terms of community consultation and partnership, in terms of this part that once you have the funding, or is all of that really expected well before you even can apply for funding? And Susan, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so I would just say a couple of things. I think CIHR has really moved a long way. And of course, it depends on which institute you go to. So I'm most familiar with the Institute for Population and Public Health, which is where most environment and health research gets funded, right? So they have really moved a long way. And of course, we know that once you get your CIHR funding, whatever your traditional grant length is, you get an automatic 1-year extension, and then you can ask for multiple year extensions if there are good reasons. And so I've been in that situation. I did a data linkage project. We had 5 years of funding. It took 5 years just to link the data because there were so many hurdles we had to jump through. But I also just want to point out that for people like us who are in universities, one of the other challenges is, we got to produce papers or we're going to get fired and we're not going to get tenure and all that kind of stuff. But some of my young colleagues are just so brilliant. And I would particularly point out Heather Castleton, who was at Queen's and is in the process of moving to Victoria, who publishes amazing papers. One of her most highly cited papers is called "I Spent a Year Drinking Tea." And it's just a brilliant paper about how she built the partnership to begin with. And I particularly appreciated something that Teresa put in the chat. So I just spent this time writing a chapter on humility, how to be a humble researcher. It's not easy to be a humble researcher, because when you write a grant to CIHR, you have to make it sound like you're the next best thing since sliced bread. And if you don't get this money, the sky is going to fall, right? And how you're the only person in the world who can do this. But I talked about the things that have humbled me over the years in this chapter, and then finished it by saying, if you don't have 30 plus years, and you need to know now, here's the 3 things you should do. And the number one thing I said, the first thing I said, is don't go where you're not invited. And that's exactly what Teresa said in the chat. Don't go where you're not invited, unless you're invited. And that includes, people like me who are doing work in sub-Saharan Africa. I never go into a community unless I'm working with a CSO, a community service organization, or CBO that is indigenous to the country. You know, like I work in Kenya with a Kenyan woman who runs an NGO. I work in Uganda with a Ugandan guy who started an NGO there. And I go in and I say, what do you need? We need to get papers. We need to get students finished and through their degrees. What do you need from us?
Okay, thank you. Now, in the same section, we had stuff on intersectionality, and I don't know if we need to talk specifically about this or whether that's just implicit in all of our discussion. Anybody? Oh, Mary Louise, do you want to address that or something else? And Hannah? Mary Louise first, you're muted.
I just wanted to just expand a little bit on what Susan said. There's also situations where maybe even if we were invited by a government, we may not necessarily be the best choice. I can remember, several decades ago when I was on a roundtable at a local government, and it was about homeless shelters, affordable housing, people out in the streets and so on. And I looked around the room and I said, well, unfortunately, there's no experts here. And they said, what do you mean there's no experts here? And I said, well, there's social workers, academics, various other people, but none of us, I expect, have been homeless. So we're not the experts. I think one thing that academics may not think to do, that might be very interesting for my research to participate on something, but maybe we're not the people to be doing it. And one thing I know that you do a lot of, Neil, we do have connections. We have connections with government and so on. So if there's people we know who are members of the community that would be better to speak to a topic like, say, homelessness, you can link those people up with other people and bring members of the community into these kinds of discussions to make them much more inclusive and relevant and helpful. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah, as we developed national homeless health guidelines, we actually did explicitly have people with lived experience who were part of everything, and we had and went back to our lived experience experts with things. So that was a continual process. But Hannah, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to respond to your question, Neil, about CHR and grant review and stuff like that. And I sit on the project grant review panel for the Institute for Indigenous Peoples Health, and I know that as a group, we're always very critical if we don't see letters of support from community, if we don't see prior commitments and interest from community expressed. If that isn't there, we tend to not fund the grant.
Thanks. Now, so another general thing, because I think the first part of this discussion was more some of our general experiences, what we've learned as we might try to think of future action for the group. And so another part of this is about advocacy. And I think the role of researchers or people with policy, often that seems divorced from advocacy. And Susan, to answer that question about Pegasus, we try to actually bring people together from various domains. And I wanted to really see how people saw this group, primarily of academics, and then maybe people in this regard, like Sanjay and Stephanie might want to address how you see the relationship between having this work, the products that people are going to have, and advocacy. Because I think that for some of the community-based participatory research, I think communities expect that you're going to advocate. And Teresa may also talk about that with making the links, whether we were able to do that, or there was the communities of practice for ecosystem health, where we had a discussion around that, even related to things in Hamilton there, that communities finding certain things and then thinking that now you guys are going to help us provide the solution. So maybe, Stephanie, did you want to just start to address this? And you're sort of representing our youth voice too, but also the ones who want to shake up the establishment. So why don't you start this discussion?
Yeah, for sure. I think and I'm by no means an expert, but I think the article, so a lot of what we do at Shake Up the Establishment is taking the awesome peer-reviewed journal articles that the academic community writes and summarizing them into a digestible format for a youth audience. And so I think it's really critical to have those articles and have the research to back up the arguments that we're making. One of our values is evidence informed. So if we don't have the peer-reviewed articles and the research to share why we're backing up a certain issue or why we're advocating for Bill C-230, it makes it really difficult to get to the support of our audience. And as youth, we're not able to, at this point in our careers, we're not able to write these articles or have high impact research. So it's really important that we're working with academics and having access to those articles so that we can still advocate for the issues we care about. So I guess that's my perspective. I think it's really necessary to have that research. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now, but maybe I'll have something else in a bit.
I'm going to go to Sanjay then for a second, and then I'm going to go to Isaac, because Isaac always sits back and listens, unless it's about soccer and the Ghanaian soccer team. So I'll get you to talk in a second, Isaac. But Sanjay, did you want to comment on that? Because now you've had a background in various community type of work, and now you've got this Indigenous portfolio, being non-Indigenous yourself. Just wondered whether you have any perspective on what we've been talking about.
Thanks for inviting me. I've been listening a lot now, because when we look at anti-racism, it's looked at in a very narrow lens of the direct impacts on racialized Indigenous people. But when you look at housing infrastructure the region has, the quality of housing and its impact with heat, there are so many things from a climate change point of view that it's not looked at. But again, this is so early on in the city's anti-racism reconciliation plan. I think there definitely is a lot of scope to kind of see how, in the city's scope of work and from a region's point of view, how can we actually integrate some of these pieces. And you're right, like sometimes it's looked at as anti-racism kind of work is going to dilute the environmental advocacy work, or vice versa. So there's a lot of contention about how well this work can be undertaken. So I'm here mostly to listen and learn from you guys, because there's so much of wealth of knowledge here. And it's nice, so many of you are from Waterloo region, so there's a lot more potential for partnership.
Okay, thanks. So Isaac.
I don't know, what do you want to know? Yeah, based on all of the things that have been said, yes, I can understand. And most of it is exactly what I also go through. My earlier work in Indigenous communities was quite a while ago, and I still collaborate with my colleague Chantel on most of what she's leading now. And the work we are doing now with farmers in Africa, which are almost based on the same principles. Like Suzanne said, if you are not invited, don't show up. We have tried very hard. In fact, in our most recent project that was funded by Global Affairs Canada, we called it a farmer-to-farmer agroecology project. Simply put, the farmers, we are only coming there probably because we managed to advocate to raise funds, but most of the learning and the teaching was done right by the farmers themselves. So that's why we called it farmer to farmer, which is the new principle we are probably using, that you get into communities, try to empower as many people as you can to do stuff that you are not needed. So right now, as we speak, during COVID, while many of our colleagues have stalled, because of the way we have been empowering local farmers, we literally sit here and ask them to go and do data collection on their farms, and then it's collated and we get our, even with remote sensing. I think that's the way to go, to get into communities and try to make sure that we find ways, new ways of trying to make sure when we are not there, things are going on. Those are the new things that I think I'm excited about. Yeah, we've had a few papers published on the farmers and geographic information systems, and we call it participatory GIS, but in communities, they just feel the excitement of having to look at, let's say, trends of environmental change around with the land, and they can see it clearly. And that's the only way I think you can empower some of the, even the indigenous communities. If we get in, then we get out. Then we get in, then we get out. I am guilty as well. With the work I did in Anjin, what did I leave behind besides publishing with community members? That was it, right? So I think, yeah. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that I'm probably more keen now about working in communities by letting communities do the work, by probably just supporting, because somehow I'm able to write a grant and raise the money to support them, but not necessarily because I think, yeah, I think that's my new excitement.
Yeah, I would agree with Isaac. That's one of the great silver linings, actually, of doing this work during the pandemic, is we can't go there. But we have worked in some of these communities for a long time, and we've trained local folks, and we're just building more and more and more capacity.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest hurdle is convincing our universities to let us send money.
Yeah.
My university actually invented an entirely new process to send money, all just for me. And I kept telling my vice president research how grateful I was and how special I felt. But it's taken us a long time, but now we're able to do it, and it's absolutely fantastic. And with the technology, there's no reason why we can't. I mean, we don't even have to travel anymore.
Yeah.
We like to, but we don't have to, right? There's so much capacity on the ground.
Actually, I'm going to do a quick follow-up on that before we move to concrete action. And I'm sure that some of you are reflecting on the other questions from before. But in terms of, yes, we can do stuff virtually, but Keithan and others have discussed, how do you build trust with these communities? I think Hannah also mentioned that. When you are working virtually, particularly if you're a very junior researcher, not from a community. Any thoughts about that in the new virtual world?
I think you have to read Heather Castleton's paper on spending a year drinking tea. And honestly, that's a very good point that you make, Neil. The only reason I can do this virtually in these communities is because I've worked there for 15 years, and we've built the trust. And we, I have had people in those communities say to me, we never thought we'd see you again. But going back and going back and going back over years and years and years, that's how you build trust. The only way to build trust is with time and integrity, but time is so important.
Maybe even not like it, and time and that idea of process being so important to starting a relationship, keeping that focused on process. I think as researchers, when we're working with partners who might be knowledge users who are not from vulnerable communities, we tend to play the role of the academic, and then the other people are the people who are going to use the knowledge. But I think with the partnership that I've developed, it's trying to not be an academic when we're in meetings, and trying to just collectively talk about issues in a way that everyone understands and make decisions together. which isn't the way that we're kind of trained to do things, because as academics, we're trying to get our projects done. We're trying to keep progress going. And so we kind of feel like in some places we can make decisions on behalf of teams, but I think it's really, really trying to be respectful and have a process that you adhere to that doesn't marginalize your partners in that process, and that keeps them at the table, and not just makes them feel involved, but keeps them involved. And I think what's been really important for us is that we started off our second go at this by developing documents that we all agreed on, in terms of, like, we developed a document called the Guiding Principles document for our study, which is about just a 6-pager that just lays out how everyone sees the project. And it took us some time to get agreement on the finer points of how, even what might seem like a mundane thing to a researcher, the way that something is articulated in writing can be very, very important. And then once you've got that document and everyone has agreed, okay, this is the project we're working on, that's the sort of attention to process that I think has to happen, so that partners don't feel like they're just another knowledge user that's kind of being strung along.
And can I just jump in there, because I think that is such an important point. But I think the other important point is you have to be humble enough to ask the questions about what do you want. So I know that some of my colleagues publish with their community partners, and that's really important. But I've worked with community partners, with CSOs and NGOs, who say, we don't want to be an author on this paper or this report, because we want to be able to take this report to this ministry or this agency and say, look, this fancy schmancy, university in Canada in the developed world did this research for us, and this is what they found. And they think that's more credible than if they have their name on it, which is not what I would have expected. And so what I've learned over all these years, which is hard to be humble, is to say, what do you need? And you want your name on it, we'll put your name on it. If it's better to not have your name on it, we won't put your name on it. So just tell me what you need and we'll do that for you. The other thing I'll just say, and then I want to hear from Isaac, but I have a former undergraduate student who was going to do her master's with me, and then she ended up getting this silly Rhodes Scholarship and went off to Oxford, and she's at UBC now. She's one of the leading water governance researchers in the world. Her name is Karen Bacher, and we chatted recently about this particular issue about advocacy versus research, and where do we belong in this? Because I've always really struggled with that as a researcher working with community groups. Where do I draw the line? And she actually shared this statement with me that I now use with all my students, is that she's not an advocate, she's a researcher, but she can advocate for the evidence. And so she can do good science, create good evidence. As you were saying, Stephanie, I loved what you were saying about, we want to make evidence-informed decisions, but first we need the evidence. And so she can say, you know what, I'm going to work with this group, I'm going to do really excellent science, I'm going to get some really good evidence, and then I'm going to hand it over to them and say, here's really strong science, go and do something with it. That's going to help your community. But that's a personal decision as well. We have to think about, because I've had people come back to me and say, well, I'm a researcher and I'm an advocate. So it's very much a personal decision, but that's where I've come down after all these years. I'd like to hear from Isaac about how he feels about that.
No. I tend to be quiet, but I'm also a comedian. I was just trying to make a joke. Yeah. When you were talking about communities not wanting to publish, one of our farmers in Malawi during one of the meetings complained that a lot of journals have been bugging him for review because his name is so he was wondering whether it's best to drop his email, or how does he respond to journals. That's saying, funny. Don't bother me, I don't want my name on these papers. Apparently because they see his name on papers, and now journals are aggressively pursuing anybody's name on any type of public. Yeah,
because we need reviewers so badly.
The poor farmer is in Malawi, can't afford his phone bills, and you are worrying him. Anyway, that was just a joke. I'm okay. Yeah.
So I knew we were going to have some people dropping off in not too long. And I think we wanted to figure out what we were going to do as a group. And we've been actually quite cohesive that Bruce, Susan, Cathan, Teresa, many of us here have been continuing to meet, and we see some value in us meeting, even though we haven't done anything specific concretely together. And I'm wondering what we might want to see us doing, because part of it was possibly a common research proposal. Stephanie, I think, is probably interested in now Ingrid's advocacy group that Manvi and she are now part of. We is it working on a paper? Where do we do we want to work somehow with Pegasus Institute, that we're a nonprofit and are applying for charitable status? We are an interprofessional transdisciplinary type of group, and we could see working on this in terms of the relationship of environmental toxins, but sustainability and health. Where do people see us working together, either with our core group and now our extended family, because many of you are related to multiple parts of us? What would people like to see from this group? Okay, Teresa.
It strikes me that one of the big common threads across everyone's work is the various ways in which our work is intersecting with the concept of equity and environmental equity, health equity. So that in particular could be a focus of common work. And it could be something super simple like a resource kit or shared bibliography, for example. I'm constantly asking our students to try to update a good, credible bibliography around environmental health impacts and around climate equity in particular. And sometimes it's for the most basic of needs. It's so that people who don't work in this world understand that the statement, people are impacted inequitably by climate change, is true. So that's something I could see as extremely valuable, in addition to perhaps thinking about some of our student programs.
Okay, thanks. So how about others? Well, this might be something that we want everybody to address in some way, those from Pegasus as well as those from our group. So beginning with Susan.
So a couple of things. One, once Pegasus is incorporated as a not-for-profit, you have access to MyTax. And MyTax is a funding organization in Canada that funds undergraduate and graduate students. They have something ridiculous like a 98% success rate. And so for the last 2 or 3 summers, I've had MyTax undergraduate interns. They work with me for 12 weeks, 35 hours a week. They come from all over the world, except this summer, he's virtual, but they're free. They're absolutely free. MyTax pays for everything. So Teresa, this may be something that's useful for you, because it's only recently, MyTax used to only fund projects with industry. And just a few years ago, they started to work with not-for-profits.
I'd love to know more, Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send you some emails, and there's something else I want to chat with you about after. I'll set up another meeting. The other thing I want to say to Keithan, when you were talking about your document about how to work together with community, I had a knowledge translation project through CIHR. It was about food allergy. It wasn't anything, well, I guess there's some equity stuff there, but it wasn't focused on that. But we worked with knowledge users, and we developed a terms of reference for working together with the knowledge users. It took us 18 months to develop that, 18 months out of the 5-year project. These things have to get published somewhere, so that we're not that you would have used ours, but at least you know, if you put yours up on a website somewhere, like the Pegasus project, like tools and resources, here's an example of a contract with a community that you could work with, or a terms of reference with an advisory group or a steering committee or knowledge users. Those are kinds of things that we can't publish in scientific journals. Nobody wants them, but they need to get out there. And so Pegasus could be really useful to produce those sorts of things, or at least make them accessible to others. That would be amazing. Yes, and Teresa could
Thank you
contribute.
for that.
Yeah.
I wonder, with regard to those specific suggestions, whether Mary Louise or Shauna might want to respond to those, being on our advisory committee, but also other ways in which you might see Pegasus engaging, having listened to this. I know Shauna had to go for personal reasons for a little while, but Mary Louise, and then maybe Shauna to the most recent idea about the MyTax and what Susan has suggested.
Yeah, I think having resources to make the website more robust, where there's a sharing of information. I see our organization as a bridging organization, where you have people from different lived experiences or academic expertise or knowledge of government and governance getting together and networking and sharing resources. And I think in this area of complex, wicked problems, I think it's really important to have bridging organizations. One of the challenges I see with this organization, and this may not be a challenge, it may just be one that I perceive, is that if you have too many different topics going on and different ideas going on, it can be very rich and robust, but it can also lead to institutional paralysis. So that what the happy medium might be there, I don't know, somewhere in the mushy middle, as they say in public administration. But you know, I think that's, I do see the role of Pegasus that way, as a bridging organization where there's this co-production of knowledge between, you know, people who are in, say, the health professions or the sciences, ecology, social sciences, social justice, and so on. The other thing I do see, and it just emerged in Pegasus over the last 10 years, well, before it had the name Pegasus, and that's, I think, a very strong piece to all of this. It seems to show up in almost everything we do, is this notion of social justice. And I personally would be very comfortable with focusing on underserved communities. That was in the book that Neil edited. That kind of focus, I think, will help to give us a little bit cohesion, while still allowing us to explore many different aspects of that. But that's just a personal perspective.
Thanks. Shauna, did you want to add anything right now?
I don't think so. I think there's some really great ideas, and I think Susan's point around MyTax is a wonderful resource for the organization to think about.
Yeah, and I think if we did have that, then we could perhaps develop the website the way that Susan is suggesting, as a repository, if we had a student helping to lead that, because otherwise, even if it's just putting the work of all of us together, I think that we don't currently have the resources to try to develop the webpage, even though I know the work should be minimal. I think that we would need to have a volunteer who'd be looking at that material, collating, organizing, and then could do stuff with the rest of the website.
Okay, if I could just jump in for a second, I'm just going to say two things. One, as someone who runs a charity evenings and weekends, websites actually do take a lot of time, and so does social media. And you have to invest in it if you want your organization to be up to date and accessible to people. It doesn't take much to invest in it. We actually hire We have a 10-hour-a-week admin and a 2.5-hour-a-week communications officer who's like 22, who knows how to use social media, because none of us old people do. The other thing I would say is that MyTex not only has undergraduate interns, they also have programs for postdocs and PhD students. And they're very minimal investment on the part of the organization. So I've sent the link to Teresa to have a look at. You just click on the not-for-profit link. It's a very easy site to navigate. But I've had PhD students who have worked half-time in an NGO for a year as a project development officer for zero money for that NGO. All the money came from my tax.
Yeah, I think even with the Balsillie School too, now that you're part of that, Susan, I think we've talked about that with some of our doctoral students. Okay, other ideas? Sure, Barbara.
Should it be a peace stream link to show its necessity for social justice?
Yeah, so just to clarify that question too, so Pegasus as a conference was divided into 4 streams: the Global Health International, Global Health Local, Peace, and Sustainability. And now as we're reconceiving ourselves under the peace side, the issues of justice and equity and anti-racism are considered to be part of that. That they could also be part of each of the other streams. So we're a little bit less vertical or stratified, I guess, in terms of our organization. So anything else that people are thinking about in terms of actual concrete work that we might do together, either being involved in other things that you're doing that you see this group or Pegasus as facilitating, or something new that we look for, just as we were trying to look for a field epidemiologist years ago, and maybe MyTax is an easier way of doing that, because when we tried to get this fully trained field epidemiologist who might work with us for a year with some of those communities, and we were thinking about whether it be Hamilton or Windsor or Walpole Island, maybe this would be a way of getting somebody with some expertise. So Teresa or Caitlin or anybody else, any thoughts about that?
Well, I think for us, where that would be useful at this point, it would be maybe a bit down the road when we're working, given our focus right now on vulnerable communities and climate change and those tools to advance those issues, that having the backup for the implementation of the efforts that people want to put in place is where having experts on the ground could be useful. Obviously, for cases, we always have needs for experts, but I'm talking about this specific constellation of law reform and equity work that we're thinking about at the municipal level in Ontario. So if people come to mind for that, then sometimes we might table information from that person as part of a community's delegation to their council, or bring it along to a meeting with public health officials, that kind of thing. Can't hear you, Neil.
Sorry, I was just talking to my wife for a second, just to see if she wanted this computer or not. Yeah, go ahead, Teresa, if there was anything more you wanted to say, or if other people wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, so again, just on this theme of taking the conceptual to the ground, so to speak, is when people have information or good reports that can help us compellingly make the case that a bylaw on heat in dwellings can work, I'm all ears, because we need to bring that kind of thing forward, or whatever it might be that we're working on, you know, in terms of transportation, in terms of building materials, in terms of indoor environmental health. There's all kinds of ways we're looking at, you know, access to food, as I mentioned, all kinds of ways where we're looking at the particular communities and what different communities are doing around identifying the actual equity impacts. And I saw an extremely good toolkit just lately. I'd have to go searching for the source, but I sent it on to Sarah Shams, our law student, who's pulling together the material this summer from all of our student programs over the past year, where it was a toolkit around equity that didn't just say, in general, this kind of measure or approach could work for vulnerable communities, but parsed the specific vulnerable community and the specific impact, and then the measure that was responsive specifically to that impact and that particular community. So that kind of concrete link is extremely useful to us. So when you say, what do you mean? So I use the example of heat bylaws. So it's not just heat in general. It's so elderly people might have reduced mobility. They might be on medications that make them more prone to heat. If the elevator quits in their building, they're not going to be able to walk down, you know, 13 stories to the ground, maybe. So what are we going to put in place to make sure that if they have to stay in place, they're not vulnerable to, you know, bad heat exhaustion or worse outcomes? And then more systemically stepping back, what are we going to put in place to make sure that the populations, the kind of housing that the population we're concerned about is occupying, is better protected? And that's where, for example, our energy poverty work comes into play, where we, you know, worked hard to get conservation programs in place across electricity and natural gas that are deep measures, not just these kind of superficial measures for communities who would never, ever, you know, in several lifetimes be able to replace their own insulation or that kind of thing. And so just these kind of nested interventions that can work on assisting vulnerable communities from the impacts that we can then require, we can then take from a law reform perspective, and we can say, let's have, you know, a requirement that the utilities, when they're doing their rates applications, have to put some resources toward this kind of program. Let's have the Ontario Electricity Support Program that assists with energy bills so that families can put their, you know, limited funds to something else. Let's have some rules in the public health standards that ask family physicians in that community to report, you know, as part of a reportable outcome if they're seeing risk from heat for particular populations. You know, it's just kind of taking it and thinking, lots of hand waving, what can we start to do that's actually going to make a difference, and we can put some force of law or persuasion behind it to make sure it happens sooner than later.
I guess I'll just follow that up if there isn't any other comments specifically about this, because this also relates to Pegasus too. So on the, you started that discussion more on the policy side, on the lawmaking side, and I think that, and Mary Louise may also wish to comment on this. That as we start to look at this, because I think that Hannah and Caitlin have also suggested that's really what the communities really want in terms of some of that concrete change. Some of it might be public awareness, but some of it is actually influencing governments or those who can change conditions. Are there ways that this group or Pegasus might be able to work in that way beyond what you're already doing?
I mean, I don't know if this is I don't really have an idea for a specific project, but so I happened to go, so, you know, we've been living in the pandemic and we've been living with our families nonstop, and I've got 2 young kids, and about a month ago or a month and a half ago, my partner and I just we were like, we need to do some work. We need to get some work done. It's been a long time. So we actually went and booked like an Airbnb somewhere, and we shared the time. I took care of the family for half the week, and then my wife took care of the family. And when we went up to this place called Teeswater in Ontario, and along the way, I started seeing all of these signs, these anti-nuclear signs. And then I went and got to my Airbnb, which was this beautiful little, very basic kind of cottage. And the owner came to introduce themselves, and we started talking, and I realized that they were one of the central people in Teeswater trying to resist this siting of a nuclear waste facility locally. And we had this really great conversation, and I was trying to, and I realized like they had been doing all of this grassroots organizing for so long, and they weren't aware, it seemed, about some of the potential links that could have been made. So I started talking about CELA and how, like, well, there might be some options you could explore in terms of environmental assessments that could be called, or because it seemed like nobody had thought about public health impacts on the community. Et cetera, et cetera. They'd clearly done a lot of work. They'd clearly had a lot of passion, but they hadn't started to think about some of the other potential opportunities. And maybe I wonder if there's a need for, like, I kind of see CELA as this group that, like, if somebody has like a environmental concern and they think there's a legal issue, they can go to CELA and talk it through maybe and see if there's any. But maybe, some of these issues can be approached more holistically. Like, maybe it's not necessarily legal action, maybe it's a health research study or some sort of an impact assessment. And I wonder if there's a need for kind of a group that can, we talked about advocacy and wanting to be invited into projects. So I wonder if there's a need for like a group where communities who have concerns about their environmental health can have kind of like people to talk about it with and bounce ideas around and just see if there's more that can be done when it comes to kind of the sectors that we represent around this table. And that might then lead to natural partnerships between different stakeholders around this table. It might lead to like writing a research grant one day because, a community is really interested in exploring some aspect of the situation. And in that way, it wouldn't be kind of, us designing a project that maybe it's the right project for the right time, but maybe not, but kind of waiting for things to come our way. And I don't know how to do that effectively, how to like kind of bring projects in. I suspect maybe CELA's got some experience with that, but just an idea that I had when I was finding some relief a couple of months ago and had that kind of chance encounter with the owner of that farm, and realized there seems to be a bit of a need for some of these communities.
I suspect the owner of that farm knew about CELA. Yeah, I just put in the chat that maybe something like a referral list for researchers around environmental and equity health issues might be quite constructive to have for exactly that kind of effort. We have, we know hydrogeologists to refer groups to, we know planners to refer to groups to, but we should broaden the kinds of areas of expertise we refer groups to. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I do think that I would actually like to finish early, and I did see that people did have other things, and even though we planned on 2 to 5, I was actually expecting we would try to finish a little bit early, but I wanted to just give people a chance for the last go around. I think it was really important for us as a group to start to reconvene and to branch out to others. So I think that this is useful, and we know that it's not the end of the conversation because it's not the start either. But just a quick go around with everybody in terms of last minute types of things, any reflections on stuff from before. And I think that Melissa will try to take particularly the latter part of the discussion in terms of some concrete ideas. We can bring those back for feedback. So I think those were good suggestions, Cathan and Teresa. So as we move to that, we'll start off with Barbara, Mary Louise, and then just get everybody else to just have any last minute observations, but you still can bring up new points or reflections because we do have the time, and I think the rest of us aren't in as much of a hurry, but I think that we can probably wrap up within 15 minutes, I would gather. Barbara, why don't you start off?
Just a quick follow-up to Keaton's suggestion. Maybe we should have a list of other organizations that people can call on. I saw that same on my way back from Lake Huron like a few days ago, the same miles and miles of yellow signs about nuclear energy stuff. And, do those people know about Gordon Edwards? Do they know about the Ontario Clean Air Alliance and so on? I am IPPNW, but there's maybe
they do. They've had him speak. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I said they do. They've had him to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but I think it's a good idea to be a sort of resource.
Great.
And it's been a great couple of hours. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Mary Louise.
Yeah, I'm just mulling this over because you're asking for ideas. A lot of us are very action-oriented, community-based research and predisposition, it seems to me. So the grounded, the bottom-up kind of research, I think, appeals to many of us. And this group has got a real diverse sets of skills and abilities. The early 1990s, late 1980s, I was involved in an organization primarily in rural and remote mining communities, resource communities. And this organization, I don't know if it's still around anymore, used to go into, they were all mostly academics, and they used to go into fairly remote rural communities in various parts of Canada to have their annual meetings. And what they did was engage with the local community that participated, and they would talk about many of the issues, if it was a forestry community or mining community or whatever, agricultural community, about their issues. And then the academics would try to offer some useful connection suggestions, ideas, what could be done. And then from that, working papers would emerge, as well as various publications and great connections. And you'd learn a lot, of course, with some of that lived grounded experience of the community members that, those of us that are in academia and institutionalized in universities may not have had access to that kind of information, and we moved to different parts of the country for these meetings. Now, that wasn't the ideal model because it was mostly the academics doing the presentations. I think much more of a roundtable approach would have been helpful, but this was 30 years ago. So thinking about that, I was thinking community conversations with this group because we're dealing with an era of wicked problems, wicked, complex social ecological systems that are all interrelated at different temporal and spatial scales. So many of these issues will require this kind of interdisciplinary group, and preferably a transdisciplinary type of approach that included the grounded knowledge of people that are affected. So whether you're talking about climate change or policing, violence and policing, or so on, or the combination thereof of different issues that are going on, we could choose a fairly general question, and maybe instead of just having our meetings and Toronto where people could fly in or whatever. It could be a combination of possibly online, though I'm not a huge fan of too many of these online. Maybe I'm just tired. You know, and go into specific communities. So instead of being in a very centralized place to allow experts, academic experts to arrive, the so-called experts would move to various communities. I don't know. I just was reflecting on past experiences when you're asking about that, some sort of community conversations that we could do, and we would also benefit.
Okay, thank you. Hannah.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying the conversation. One thing that I just came to me when I was listening about the MyTax program. I think that was a great idea that Susan had. I helped to supervise a postdoc recently who had MyTax support, and it was a really great partnership with a community agency, and you know, kind of building on that too in terms of, you know, supporting communities as we've been talking about. You know, in my own research, I often employ community members of the community as research assistants, and some of them, I have one now from the community of Six Nations, and she's an undergraduate student at a different university. And I just think that you know, providing opportunities, whether it be MyTax or another organization, to support the work of Pegasus and being involved in research or community-based work in various capacities. And in terms of social justice, like there's such an interest and such need and such appreciation for these kind of diverse experiences for young people. So I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Thanks. Stephanie?
I really don't have much to add on. I've just loved listening to everyone and all the diverse perspectives that you all bring. I'll just say I'm happy to like loop in our organization wherever needed. Closely aligns with our own mission and values. So if you ever need a youth perspective or want to know what we're up to, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, it's been really great listening in, and we can definitely be involved if it seems like we can help out in any way. So I'll leave it there for me.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Dorothy.
I appreciated all of the suggestions that were made. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where, as Pegasus, where we'd like to, as a group, go ahead and move on some of these things. I think they're very, I want to say valid, but also very useful for peoples to use. I also, in listening to Mary Louise and putting together what she was saying, is that the strength of being able to get more from the communities themselves. And I guess with that, it's a reflection of how we work with, as researchers, how we work with Indigenous communities. And it doesn't just have to be an Indigenous community, it can be any community that need to make that connection with peoples. Because my understanding is that if we don't start relating to those communities that we're from, then the change isn't necessarily going to happen that's needed to look after some of these environmental stories that we need to address. And so I just think that with Pegasus, if we can promote or provide those kind of avenues where people can do that, I think this conversation has been very productive in that sense. So, miigwech.
Thank you. So we have, I think, Shauna, Camille, Caitlin, and Teresa. I know you've all spoken recently, but not since I posed this wrap-up question. Is there anything final that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, I think I've made lots of suggestions and lots of requests for help.
Shauna, or?
No, I apologize. I had to sneak out for another meeting. I feel like I missed additional richness in the conversation. What I did hear is humbling to hear the experience and perspectives of everyone, and reassuring to see that everyone has a similar set of principles and values, in particular in engaging with communities. So thank you.
Thanks. Ethan or Camille?
Nothing else to share. Yeah, really happy to have met everyone though and had these discussions.
Now, I guess one question that I will put, should we still plan on meeting with this group in the fall, perhaps, just to touch base, or have we really said what we needed to? Would it help to maybe a shorter meeting in the fall? But what do people think?
My thought is to do some exchange by email, like what is the Pegasus board thinking it's capable of doing or willing or wanting to do, and some of the other resources people have spoken about, and then depending on what those things are, then we can meet on those a little bit down the road. So maybe not early fall, but maybe later fall. So depending on what student programs might be coming up, or whether there's a repository of resources, or whether there's biblioreferences, or whether there's some other sharing that's intended to be underway. Obviously, we can all reach out to any of the others of us at any time for a specific collaboration that we may have sparked by realizing what each other is doing, and we do that from time to time. But you know, there were quite a few things that people kind of indicated they wanted to dig into a bit, or could put on the table. So maybe we can watch for the notes from this and then follow up on those, you know, over the rest of the summer, early fall, and then have a follow-up late fall once those have gelled a bit.
Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So
Yeah, I also think that I just want to be mindful of, for some of us in academic institutions, September is an intense time, but I think that September is going to be potentially an intense month for all of us in this country if the world opens up or Canada opens up. So I know that we're being very careful, or in my world, of not adding too much to that noise, particularly at the beginning of the month, because I feel like it's going to be really wonderful to see people in person, but also very overwhelming. So I think having a meeting later in the month or early in October would help to alleviate any of those additional stresses.
Right, Miigwech, thank you. Shauna, that you are echoing, you and Mary Louise somehow, I think that you share part of your cortex there, because she just sent me something along those lines earlier this afternoon. So yeah, so I hear you both that we will have a lot on the go, I think, in September as things open up. So yeah, we'll try to share things by email. That Melissa will try to get some notes out to the group. And but it's really nice seeing some of you after so long. Also, we'll put this on the website. It won't be of interest to people other than our group, but if you wanted to look back at what people have said here, or just try to remember, oh, so-and-so did something, but I can't really recall what it is, you'll be able to go back to the video to look at that. So, so thank you all. Really appreciate spending a July day like this. I think if we weren't in pandemic times, I don't know how many people we would have been able to get out for this. That's one of the things to be thankful with the pandemic, I guess. So looking forward to connecting with all of you in whatever form. And thanks for the wonderful ideas.
Thanks, Neil. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody else.
Take care, everyone.
Bye now.